So yes, my name is Margot, and we are hosting this event on behalf of Togme Sangpo Buddhist group, for some very familiar small group in Scotland. And our tradition is that Venerable Robina comes to visit us every 2 years. It used to be every year, but now she's so busy with her world tour, it takes 2 years to travel around the world. So this would have been our weekend. Yet things have changed, so now we have a weekend on Zoom. So I'm delighted to have you here, Venerable Robina. We've been looking forward to this. I'm not sure if you require any other introduction. I get the impression everybody knows you very well from all your teachings.
Okay.
So it is a great honor to have you here. So I want to hand over the space to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Katarina. Thank you so much, Margot, and thank you for having me. And I wish I were there, but maybe soon I will be able to be actually there again. Okay, we hope, we pray that things change. People, all right? So we start with that. Just start with a little first of all, start with a prayer. This is very traditional. It's very Tibetan, but it's really wonderful meaning. So Margot, on behalf of Togme Sangpo, will lead a little prayer called Offering a Mandala. So if you know Buddha's cosmology and know all the contents of the universe, and you can imagine that, but if we probably don't, then we imagine, just simply use your creative imagination, imagining all the marvelous things of this world, which is the objects of the senses, really, that make people happy. And you imagine piling them all up and offering to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. It's got really nice meaning. So if you know the prayer, great. We got it. Have we got it on the screen? No, or we just sing it?
No, I don't have it on the screen.
So just don't worry about the words. Margot will sing it in Tibetan. If you know it, you join in. But just in your mind, imagine you're offering all these marvelous things to the Buddha. It's like you go to the shop and ask for your ice cream. You give your money. You know, it's just like offering to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. It has great meaning. Okay.
Sanji Pagi Jukshin Metok Rani Rablinji Nide Kyan Padi Sangye Jingdu Mekte Uwagi Rokunam Dakshingla Chepashong.
Hidam. So we imagine our Buddha happily receiving our offering. Hidam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niyatayami. So now I will lead a little prayer, and this time the meaning is two things. The first two lines, I'm saying them in my words. I'll say the prayer in my words. No, first of all, the meaning is the first two lines are for anybody in the room who already identifies with being a Buddhist. So what it is sort of reiterating our reliance, our refuge, as they call it, in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. The Buddha, his teachings, and our community, spiritual community. We rely upon those, you know. The second two lines are really stating this. The Lamas would say stating our motivation. We might say stating our purpose. Why are we here together? Why are we all here together to listen to these teachings? And I promise you that includes me. So we think the most altruistic, the most expansive reason or motivation is we're going to listen to these teachings, to take some tools from it. It needs to be practical, to help us develop, first of all, our amazing potential, so that we can be a benefit to others, all the way to leading them to enlightenment. Thinking like this is a really marvelous kind of broad aspiration. So I'll say it first in English in my own words. I say it very kind of casually, and then we'll sing it 2 times in Tibetan. So we're thinking, you know, until we're enlightened, we're going to rely upon the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And then by the virtuous karmic seeds that we plant in our mind from listening to these teachings, may we become a Buddha to benefit all suffering sentient beings. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok. Okay, people. So, okay, These words are so famous, aren't they? Samsara and Nirvana, like names of rock bands, names of pets. They're famous, you know. So what does Buddha mean by them? We can make up our own story. I think the roughest way we think about it is samsara, some sexy place where you're allowed to have sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and then nirvana is this boring place where you've got to give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll. These kind of like, oh God, who wants to go to nirvana? You know, boring. I mean, a little bit joking. So what does Buddha mean by them? Well, I think part of the problem I know, for example, when I first heard all these Buddhist teachings, of course it's because Tibet was sort of isolated up on the other side of Mount Everest, which is an advantage for them because everything stayed there nice and rich and delicious. It didn't get too polluted, you know, both physically and spiritually. That in Buddhism, you know, when you hear a traditional Tibetan Buddhist teacher, honestly, it's exactly as he would have talked in the medieval days, exactly as he would have talked in the 14th century. Honestly, it really is true. I mean, in Buddhism, got different, in traditional languages, it's the same. It used to be that with English, didn't it? You've got your really honorific. Here they've got their philosophical language, which has not changed since they first cultivated it in the 8th century, I promise. It's exactly the same. And so a marvelous thing about that is the meaning stays very rich and clear. So as language changes radically, you can argue that it becomes kind of like a bit degenerate, you know. But for them, it stayed perfect. Then they've got the third, which is their regular, you know, day-to-day language. But the philosophical or spiritual has stayed since the 8th century, when they got their translators in and they started translating all the Indian literature, all the body of knowledge coming from India into Tibetan, you know. So when you first hear Lama Zopa teaching, and my teacher, Lama Zopa, I first heard him teach, it's like he's in the 14th century. So the structuring, the context, the framework, the language, the words, everything, it's just so arcane and it's really hard. When we read traditional Tibetan books, Indian, Buddhist, it's easy to put it in the sky because it doesn't sound like down-to-earth life, you know. So it seems to me in the same way that the Tibetans, probably when Buddhism first came there, 7th, 8th century, they had to start reframing it, although they kept it pure in the Indian. But we absolutely in our culture have to reframe it because otherwise we can't hear it as real. It just sounds like abstract philosophy. And anyway, we don't take religion very seriously, you know. If it was science, we'd be all excited because we think that's real. But the Buddhist approach is, you know, that first of all, he's not a creator. His view is similar to a scientist, and this is a bit shocking to us, insofar as whatever he's stating as being what he's found to be true, which is essentially what Buddhism is, Buddha's observations about the mind, about happiness, about suffering, about the universe. It's actually a coherent worldview, which might be surprising to us. It's coming directly from his experience. This is a really powerful point. So in that sense, he's scientific, although we don't think it like that. In fact, I'm being sarcastic. But I remember vividly years ago in New Zealand, a man who actually was a scientist. He asked the question, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? Which is a brilliant question. Where did they come from? Now, if I'm a Christian, I know it's from revelation. And that usually is our view of religion, isn't it? Spiritual teachings are somehow from on high. And I said to him, well, you know, would you ask Einstein who revealed the teachings about relativity to him? And of course, everybody laughed. And we know the answer is, of course we wouldn't. Because of that serious knowledge, we know Einstein used his intelligence, used his noggin. He observed the universe. He presented his findings. He wasn't speculating. He didn't have a dream about it. He didn't have a vision of it. It wasn't from on high. He said, this is what I found to be true. Now it's over to you. Here's my methodology. If you want to prove the same thing, you go through the same steps. Well, I swear to you, that is exactly Buddha, you know. And as the Dalai Lama says, if we decide to take on board into our lives Buddha's observations about reality and make them our own. Part of I'm just adding this piece. The process is that you don't just listen to it and believe it. You don't just study Einstein and believe it. You don't do botany and say, I believe in botany. It's a really crucial point. You engage in it, you internalize it, then you prove it to be true. And as His Holiness says, if you do that and you're ticking the boxes as you go, and then at some point you actually prove the Buddha's wrong, well, of course you would reject him. That's very surprising to us. We think of religion as mystical, beyond belief. It's all about belief. It can't be proved. And that fits in a way if you posit a creator. But this is Buddha's major difference. He neither posits a thing called a soul, nor some kind of cosmic, some energy of a being who runs the universe. There's no view like that in Buddhism. And this is what takes us time, really, because we hear it like that. We listen through those lenses, those ears, but it's not like that. So anyway, that's the background piece. Buddha's this person who went through this amazing system already existing in India well before the Buddha. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama often says, it was incredible Indians more than 3,000 years ago who first investigated the nature of self. We probably thought it was Freud 100 years ago, No. And it's only really now, with all this amazing literature coming out from His Holiness and all the Tibetan monastic system, the university system, where the philosophy coming directly from India, which began to degenerate. The Nalanda Monastic University, which was flourishing in India, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th century, then gradually degenerated, various reasons. And then, but by 7th, 8th century, it was already going to Tibet. So it's kept living and alive, extant since then. And the Dalai Lama always says we are the Nalanda tradition, this amazing body of knowledge and the greatest brains in the Buddhist world coming from Nalanda. That's fully developed in Tibet. And even though now in exile, even though it's more fragile, it's still fully existing. All the holy beings, in all the monastic universities, and especially in India, that have been reestablished there. So here we are now. Okay, good. So here we are now. I've heard these teachings from my Tibetan teachers. I haven't heard the Indians teach. I've read some of the books, but I read usually the commentaries, by the Tibetans, and then the present lamas. I think I was talking about the arcane language. One of the things I wanted to say. So Lama Yeshe, our teacher, or Lama Yeshe, who founded with Lama Zopa the FPMT that Togme Sangpo is part of, and that I've been part of since the 70s when I became a nun. He had this amazing ability. They both started to learn English immediately in the late 60s. Somehow, and then they met their first Western students. And then there's a flood of them in the early 70s, and then the Kopan Monastery in Kathmandu started, which began as a monastery for the young Sherpas and then Tibetans, and now there's 500, 600 monks there, and there's a nunnery for nuns down the road, about 500, 600 nuns, and it's also a facility for foreigners. It's been that since the early 70s. So Lama Yeshe, from the very beginning, because the majority of his students were foreigners, like, people from the West, mostly then, he learned. For me, it's so astonishing. I happen to have the job of editing some of his teachings, editing his books. So it blows my mind how Lama talked. It's like he was born a Western hippie, I promise. He just somehow understood. He learned English, and he learned not the translation of his Tibetan, but he kind of went straight into the Western mind and spoke like a modern psychological person. It's quite astonishing. I mean, when I look at his teachings and I edit them, it blows my mind how marvelous he was. And that, for me, I think if I hadn't heard him in the beginning, I met them both together in 1976, and I heard Lama Zopa, very traditional. I don't think I could have grabbed me, but Lama Yeshe grabbed me because he was able to get the essence from what Buddha's, this vast body of knowledge is saying, got the essence of it and put it in an experiential, tasty way to encourage us to realize that we can do it too, So what is it Buddha's telling us we can do? Well, the word Buddha really tells us, I always quote this, it's delicious. The etymology of this word is delicious. So Buddha is the end result of this work we're doing as a Buddhist. If you're on the Mahayana path, you're on a course, it's called the Lam Rim in Tibetan, the gradual path, and this is going to be our framework here. But the end result is you go through these stages, as we know from the Lama Zopa, very politely, honouring the lineage, would talk about the first levels of the practice on this packaging of the Lam Rim, put together by the 14th century Tsongkhapa, taken from the text by 11th century Atisha, who was Indian, coming from the Nalanda tradition. He wrote this little text called The Light That Guides You on Your Way. And he took the essence of all the major parts of Buddhism, mysticism, the psychology, the metaphysics, the meditation, and put all the essence of those teachings in an orderly way, orderly according to the capacity of the students to internalize it. And that's just like any body of knowledge, isn't it? You enter into music at the most basic, then you go to the middle, then you go to the advanced, then you graduate. Same here. So you graduate on this course, Lam Rim is like course, as a Buddha. So the etymology of this word is so delicious. Bud, the first syllable, or the equivalent in Tibetan, sang, gye, sang, the first syllable, implies the utter eradication from one's own mind, one's own consciousness, of all delusions, all ego, all fears, all nonsense, all the rubbish. This is the meaning of liberation. That's the meaning of nirvana. Well, at least the first level of nirvana, cessation of suffering and its causes. It means cessation of what? Suffering and its causes. So this is telling us what Buddha has found, and we're going to go into that we can rid the mind of suffering and its causes. And the essential causes are the mind. We're going to go into this exactly. What's in the mind? So that not only can we do that, that's liberation. There's a nice analogy, a bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. So if you like, the culmination of the wisdom wing is your own nirvana, your liberation from suffering. You get out of the problems, you finish, you're done, You've finished samsara, you've entered into your nirvana. Not someplace like heaven, but the cessation of your suffering and its causes, your mind. Second, not only that, on the Mahayana path, we can develop the compassion wing. And that is the da, implied by the second syllable, gye, ga, da. And that implies the development to perfection of everything else in the mind. Love, compassion, wisdom, kindness, generosity. This almost seems like too simple, But if we read the qualities of a person who's achieved that, it would sound like science fiction, I promise. So astonishing. But this is what Buddha has found on the Mahayana path, that every one of us possesses this potential. So the job, if you enter into being a Buddhist on the Mahayana path, you're on this course, and it might take several lifetimes, it's okay. You're going to graduate as a Buddha baby. So now, if you want to you're going to enter into a course where you graduate as a Buddha, you rid the mind of all the rubbish and you grow all the goodness. Right there, this instant, it indicates the methodology, doesn't it? If I want to rid the mind of all the rubbish, and we've got to know why, I'm going to go into this, and I want to grow all the goodness, then I better learn to distinguish between them. And that's the hard job of getting out of samsara into nirvana. So in this bigger picture these different levels of practice, different levels of teachings, as Lama Zopa politely says, the very first level are the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. Well, it's a mouthful. Sometimes you hear it's translated as the teachings of the lowest capability student. Well, why not call it junior school? I like that. It's very tasty, very simple. Then you go to the next level, which is high school, the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the middle capability. And this is where we're going to focus. This is where we start to really get out of samsara and get into nirvana, if you like. It's got to do junior school too. Then the compassion wing, the great scope of teachings and practices, these are the bodhisattva aspect of the path, where we now add to that wisdom this immense empathy with the suffering of others, such that we then become a Buddha, and we only wish to benefit others, and we'll bop around from life to life benefiting sentient beings, Roughly speaking, like that. So, the Four Noble Truths is Buddha's really nice presentation. It's his first teaching, actually. Once he got enlightened under this tree, as they talk, this tree in Bodh Gaya. He'd been going through all this amazing system before that. He went as far as he could go in the system that was already existing, so-called Hindu, but I don't know all the terms for all the different philosophical views that were existing at the time. But we have to know that India was pretty amazing and flourishing in these incredible holy beings, bopping around the universe, around India, looking into the meaning of life. They're the ones who investigated, as His Holiness says, the nature of self. They're the ones who cultivated and developed this amazing view, this amazing technique called, the world vaguely knows it as mindfulness. And we've got our own 47 varieties, but it's based on this extraordinarily sophisticated, brilliant psychological skill that's known actually as calm abiding, or shamatha in Sanskrit. And it's the cultivation of this subtle level of mind that we don't even posit as existing in modern psychology, and certainly not in neuroscience. Because if you were to see a person who's fully accomplished this calm abiding, it's been around for these thousands of years, and it's an extant technique. Buddha took it with him when he went, when he moved onto his own direction. And it's a living, people looking like you and me are right now up in the mountains, metaphorically or actually, accomplishing this single pointed concentration, samadhi. So these Indians, they're the ones before the Buddha, well before the Buddha, they created this technique, and what do they do with it? Well, they achieved what they said was nirvana, but liberation, samadhi, but Buddha felt they hadn't done enough. So he said there was still some semblance of ego left. So he diverged in that direction, and specifically in relation to his own findings about the nature of self. Well, we have Buddhism now. So then they invented this technique, which is the brilliant skill that you need to accomplish to do the work of unpacking and unraveling at the deepest level of our mind, all the nonsense in our mind, because that's what Buddha's saying is all the cause of our suffering, all the stuff in our minds. So this is where we have to learn the Buddhist model of the mind, which we're going to discuss. That's in this high school section. What the root causes of problems, which he calls samsara, being in samsara, quote unquote, simply speaking, means caught up in these neuroses, caught up in ego grasping, attachment, anger, aversion, and all the other. Buddha identifies 84,000 of them, but he narrows them down, luckily, to 3, the so-called 3 poisons, the 3 toxic emotions. They sound so cute to us. You don't go to your therapist and say, I've got the 3 poisons. I'll just shut up and go home and wait till you get a more serious problem. You want to kill your husband or something. I'm joking, but get my point. So this concentration technique invented by these Indians, they went as far as they could go, removing from the mind the grosser suffering, the more subtle levels of suffering, but not the subtlest, according to the Buddha. So he went and diverged in his own direction, having found there was still more to be removed from the mind, more delusions, which he did. He, realised the ultimate way that things exist. And then he realised all this under this tree. And then he bopped around for a while and he figured he better start teaching. So he walked to Varanasi, which is sort of an 8-hour drive away with all the trucks and things. We go there every year on our pilgrimage that raises money for our prison project. That was an advertisement, snuck in. But there's no pilgrimage these days, unfortunately, is there? We do one every year since 2001. But we haven't done any this year. We're hoping to do, but it's not going to be possible. Anyway, it's about an 8-hour drive, with the buses and things. But, he walked there slowly and he gave his first teaching. He met his old students from before. When he was on the previous different he was looking for his own path, trying all these different methods through the Indian system, these genius Indians, these amazing yogis and scholars that we know nothing about, but these days we know more about them now, all these discussions, and with His Holiness and more being published in English, and more Westerners, modern people, physicists, scientists, seriously respecting this view that's been around for these 3,000 years, and the Buddhist ones of 2,500 years. So it's very marvellous, So Buddha gave his first teaching. So there's 4 noble truths. I think the truths aren't noble. I think it means the 4 truths for the noble ones. I don't know what that word in Sanskrit is, but the noble ones are those who've discovered the truth of this, who've realized, who've achieved their own nirvana, who've quit samsara. So the 4, and I like the word facts. Truth sounds a bit holy, although truth. Facts. Things you can prove. I like that. So the 4 facts for the noble ones. Okay, the 4 facts for the noble ones. And they're all framed in terms of suffering. So the first one is there is suffering. And there's different ways of approaches to it, but the one he does discuss, the one that is really tasty, which we'll go into, is the 3 levels of suffering. Then there are causes of suffering. This is kind of crucial. Because the third one is you can achieve to put it in an abstract way, you can achieve the cessation of these. In other words, you can get rid of suffering and its causes. And then 4th is how to do it. It's a very practical presentation. It's given in great depth sometimes, quite complex, but we're going to talk about it in a simple way. I couldn't do complex anyway. So it's really helpful because the fact is, if you have a problem in life, you know perfectly well you have to first identify the problem. You've got to be precise about it. But in order to solve the problem, this is so obvious we take it for granted. If you're going to solve a problem, you need to know the causes, don't you? Once you know the causes, I swear that implies a solution. You're on the case now. That's a very interesting point. So the suffering, Buddha says. We go, yep, we agree. But his view of it's kind of bigger than ours, a bit kind of more broad. And there's 2 ways of describing what Buddha means by suffering. From the big picture point of view, because really Buddhism is this vast world view. If you look at all the Nalanda tradition, this great monastic university that flourished near Rajgir, where Buddha taught in the Hatsuta, near the Vulture Peak. This amazing place that flourished, was massive. 10, 20,000 monks. Of course, mostly monks. Probably some of the girls came and squeezed their breasts flat and cut their hair and pretended to be boys, no doubt. But, typical what it was more the boys. And eventually from all over the world, mostly from Asia, started coming there and studying all levels of Buddhism. And it was this vast, amazing place of extraordinary flourishing in Buddhist metaphysics, psychology, you name it, the works. So as I said before, His Holiness, we are of the Nalanda tradition, he said. All these beings kind of went on to Tibet. And then it died in India, but it kept flourishing in Tibet until, of course, 21st century, 20th century. The Chinese communists came along and another whole thing happened. This is world, isn't it? Things come and go. So now it's flourishing, struggling to flourish, it seems like, in the modern world, So, okay, so the big picture point of view, I'll just mention that briefly. The big picture point of view is that the Buddha would say there are trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and countless trillions of what they refer to as sentient beings. And the term in Tibetan is very tasty. It's the term Sem Chen, mind possessor. A mind possessor. I like that. Sentient beings are rather vague, but I love the term mind possessor. And as far as the Buddha is concerned, there's trillions of them, and he divides them all into these, he's got a very coherent worldview. He divides them all into different levels of samsara. And you could argue for different suburbs. Why not use that analogy? So the peak of samsara that the Indians discovered, they call that these formless beings and form beings. This is pretty abstract, but it's these beings who've cultivated this samadhi to such an intense degree of subtlety that they're just absorbed in the depth of subtle concentration. So that for them is the end result. Buddha says, no, It's not. That's where he diverged. Then you've got the third one. There's two of those. There's three of these, first of all. Then you've got one big one called the desire realm. And there's 6 suburbs in that one. So we're in that one. This is just the big picture. We go into this occasionally. I'll touch upon it. Keep remembering this is Buddha's observation. He's not making it up. You don't have to believe him. He's not a creator. He's telling you what he's seeing. So they're all described in terms of the mind, because they're all mind possessors. So they're all minds at different levels, from joy to the most intense suffering. There's a spectrum from the most intense bliss, and they are called the God realms, a couple of those. And that's equivalent to the Christians' heaven, to the Muslims' paradise. And this is why it seems to me is really obvious, isn't it, that over the centuries, humans in all the different cultures of humans, it seems to all come up with similar findings. Similar. I mean, the Australian Aboriginals, I'm not sure about them. They were for 40,000 years, they stayed there quiet. Then these wretched English people popped along and made a mess. But their view is so abstract. They call it the dream time. I honestly don't understand it. It's so abstract because it existed in such isolation, it seems. But it seems like every human on the planet in different places has come up with different observations that we could call spiritual, if you like, more than seeing what's in front of you, views about the universe, about happiness, about suffering, how it comes into being. And it does seem, if you even look at the Arabic, what do you call the Arabic religions, Christianity, Islam and Judaism, many similarities. They're all cousins. Look at that little spot of land over there in Israel. You can jog across it, it's so small. The home of these 3, brothers and sisters all fighting, isn't it? It's kind of interesting. Then you've got the Buddhist one, which is a bit different, but many similarities. It seems to me very encouraging. And who do we think we are to dare to criticize any of them? We're so arrogant, all of us. The materialists are so arrogant about all religious people, and the Christians are arrogant about Buddhists, and probably the Buddhists are arrogant about the Muslims. We're so rude and narrow-minded, But it seems to me we've looked at many similar things. There's Dante writing in depth about the experiences of hell. Well, there's Buddha talking about that. I haven't jumped into that yet. Got the God realms, paradise, heaven. But the difference is the interpretation of how you experience those things and how long they last, if you like. So the Buddha's view, as long as you're in samsara, quote unquote, you are caught up in these neuroses. We're going to get to this. This is the fundamental point for the Buddhists. You're caught up in this primordial neurotic sense of a separate sense of concrete, solid, findable, pointable me. This is the deepest one that gives rise to this intense attachment to get what that me wants, that gives rise to this panic attack of aversion, anger, guilt, despair, depression when it doesn't get what it wants, and then all the other 83,997 neurotic states of mind that Buddha has mapped. You're in samsara as long as some level or other of these are functioning. So the degree to which, so the top end, the best suburbs in the desire realm are the God realms. They're called the God realms as a result of enormous virtue. Because Buddha's saying this point, and we're going to get to this is junior school, that every millisecond, whatever any sentient being thinks or does or says, every millisecond, and this is a natural law, it's called the law of karma, every millisecond of what we think and do and say just naturally programs us into the person we become. We are our own creators. Self-creation, His Holiness talks. So karma is all junior school talk, and we're going to go into this. We're going to emphasize the middle scope, but we have to refer to karma. So this is the law the Buddha says runs the universe. The trillions of sentient beings, all driven by this law of karma. There's no punishment, there's no reward, because there's no punisher, and there's no rewarder, which is the view we tend to have. We see it as guilt and bad and shame, punishment, all this blah, blah. We've made up all that, Buddha says. It's not how he sees it at all. So we are the creators of our own reality. So God realms, the beings who have this, not without getting into too much detail, but in the Vajrayana system, which is the more advanced system of Tantrayana or Mantrayana or Vajrayana, there are these detailed descriptions of how we're constructed. And it's very helpful. We've got mind, gross level, subtle level, and very subtle level. And we've also got gross physical, very subtle physical. And like the Chinese and like the Ayurvedic system, the Tibetan medical system, which is based on the Vajrayana, says we've got this subtle physical energy, these 72,000 subtle channels that course through our body, and then this prana or wind energy that courses through those channels. And inextricably linked to all those winds are our different states of mind. Our grosser level of conceptuality, love, compassion, anger, attachment, anxiety. It's a very interesting model. It's a Tibetan medical system. Your Tibetan doctor will feel your pulses, and she'll know exactly the winds that are imbalanced, unbalanced, and then she'll know it's related to your attachment. That's why you're having panic attacks, or your anger, or your this. It's a very integrated system. So the Buddha's saying everything we do with our mind produces our own future experiences mentally, but also it impacts upon our bodies. So a God being is a being who, due to lots of virtue, has got this radiant, blissful experience of a subtle light body. Their 4 elements have manifested as subtle light, and their minds are totally joyful. But it's not, and they think it's what's the Christians and Muslims call heaven, and they say that's the end result. Buddha disagrees. They're in samsara still. It's nice, but it's still, you've still got subtle delusions in your mind, and the karma will run out and you'll fall down to the lower realms again. Then you've got the lower realms, as they call it, and these are all expressions of the 3 main delusions. The animal realm is a predominance of this incredible ignorance, intense suffering. The spirit realm is a predominance of this intense attachment energy, and their subtle physical energy is like air energy. Their minds are conjoined with air. They flit around, intense suffering. And then you've got the hell realms, just like the Christians tell us, like the Muslims tell us. They've all observed it seems. Don't believe Buddha. He might be wrong. Don't just swallow it whole. So this is the bigger picture, the worldview of Buddhas. And this law of karma is what he presents as the cause of why all these people have these experiences. And then he gives the method. So this is all described in the 4 Noble Truths. But there's a more concise, there's a smaller, narrower way we can describe all this suffering in terms of what occurs in our human life. And that we can recognize. So we're going to emphasize this. Okay, the first of these 4 facts. There is suffering, and there are 3 levels. The first is called the suffering of suffering, which is, if you look into your own life, this is referring to the lower realms in the bigger picture, but in your own life, it's referring to you, and we can all see this when the bad things happen. It's really simple. Check your life, When your husband leaves you, you get your knee ache, the most intense suffering to the most mild. That's the suffering of suffering. Everybody knows it. And this is the interesting point. That's the only one we do know. That's the only one we call suffering. So the first kind of suffering is what we all know as suffering. We simply call it suffering. It's when speak very simply, it's when the bad things happen. Nobody can stand this. We know this is a nightmare. And then if you look in the world, we see it out there exactly the same when the bad things happen, That's it. That's what we mean by suffering. But Buddha has got a more nuanced view. He says this is suffering, yes, but it's only the grossest. It's the tip of the iceberg of suffering. So then there's a second kind of suffering, and he calls it the suffering of change. Which sounds kind of boring, But when we hear that what he's referring to is what we refer to as happiness, then it gets a bit nerve-wracking. What? My happiness is what you really mean by suffering? Buddha, he says, yep. And so that's the one that's tricky to see. We've got to explain it. And it's quite, we have to hear it carefully. It's not easy for us because it's not the view we hold. It's not the view we have at all. But there's an even more subtle level of suffering. So according to him, these amazing genius Indians before him, they got rid of the first kind of suffering. They had methods. They had methods to get rid of the second kind of suffering, but not the third one, and that's called all-pervasive suffering. And we'll sort of go into that later. So let's look at these 2 levels of suffering, because this is the one about how to recognize samsara and want to get the hell out of it, because you're sick of suffering. So this is where, if we start the whole packaging of the teachings, the course to Buddhahood, the junior school, high school, university, postgraduate. I like that analogy. Junior school and high school is the wisdom wing. A bird needs 2 wings, wisdom and compassion. And the compassion wing is the great scope, or I call university. And then you've got tantra, which is postgraduate. It's just my analogy, but it's quite helpful. I find it useful. Because it tells us that it's gradual practices. We don't tend to think of spiritual teachings like that, So, okay, what's the very first level of practice then? Well, the essence of the first scope of practice, the essence of all the different teachings in the Lam Rim, the essence of it, the actual practice begins when we abide by the laws of karma. This is how they say it. So what's that mean? What does that mean, Okay, like I said, Buddha's observation is that every living being, all the ants, dogs, humans, and the other ones as well we can't see, we're driven, we exist within this law. In the same way that you see gardens, growing things, there's a law called botany. Nobody made it up and owned the copyright of it. Intelligent people have this is a really crucial point. This is what natural law means. And this is the huge point to get clear about the Buddha. These fundamental things that run the universe, as far as Christians are concerned, I'm not criticizing, but it's a powerful point to be clear about. God is the creator. God is the boss. God is the creator. God runs the show. God makes the universe. God makes all the realms of existence. God creates everybody. And then he's the boss. So he says, don't do this and do that. So I always quote this. I asked a Jesuit priest friend of mine, they're the kind of the Gelugpas of the Christians. I said, what is it by definition? What defines something as a sin? This is an incredibly important point. We've got to think about these things. We often take all this for granted. He said, by definition, a sin is going against the will of God. Now, if you posit a creator, this is completely appropriate. That's why that scientist, I mentioned the scientist in New Zealand, and he said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? That's coming from the creator concept, isn't it? Because teachings are revelation. From whom? From a superior being, who is the boss, who didn't get created, who didn't come from anything else, who is the absolute reality, and who creates everything else. That's the view we have. That's the view even in Hindi, in the Indian teachings, even though they talk about karma, there's this energy that is the source of everything else. That's called God. The Muslims have that view. The Christians have that view. So if you take aside the labels of those philosophies, there are a bunch of philosophical viewpoints. So Buddha's got a different philosophical viewpoint. He has said he has found from his own experience that there is no such energy as there is superior being. He uses that word, superior being, Arya being. But the difference is Buddha says we can all become one. I gave a talk at the Catholic University in Melbourne, my city in Australia, years ago. I gave a talk. And I didn't know what I was going to talk about until I got there that morning. I had a 20-minute slot in a conference. So I looked up the dictionary for the definition of God. And it said 3 qualities: infinite compassion, infinite wisdom, infinite power. I thought, well, that's interesting, because that's what they say the 3 qualities of a Buddha are. So from that point of view, they all agree. The difference is the Christians say that energy has no cause and it creates everything else. Buddha says, no, you don't need creating, honey. There's a very different view Buddha has. So anyway, my talk was on the similarities between the definition of God and Buddha. I don't know if the Catholics liked it, but that's what I said. Because it's very similar, again, findings. But the difference is in the interpretation of where that energy comes from and the concept of a creator. There is no view like that in Buddhism. He disagrees with this completely, and all the philosophical discussions are about this. And we have to experience the truth of that, of course, in meditation. So what's his view? His view is, like I said, there are trillions of minds, trillions of sentient beings, and they're all the product of this law of cause and effect. So this is one of the first things to think about, which is the nuttiest thing we've ever heard. That if my mind, if anything, if this, what we call a mala, this beads here, if this is the product of the law of cause and effect, and we know it is, it came from this, which came from that, which came from this. So naturally, in our scientific approach, we want to find the beginning of the universe. We want to find the first cause, don't we? So we get back to the first Big Bang, or whatever they have now. I don't know if they've seen something different. So we naturally keep tracking it back, and you can track this mala, think of this, in an unbroken chain of moments of matter. It'll be unceasing for billions of years. This has to have come from the previous moment of something physical. That has to have come from something before. That has to have come from something before. You know this is true. This is the logic of things. So we get back to what we call the first of the Big Bang. As His Holiness said one time, Big Bang? No problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all. And this is the Buddhist view. You can have billions of Big Bangs, universes coming and going, beings coming and going, but there's no beginning. This is the most shocking concept in the world. This is absolutely kind of gobsmacking. What do you mean there's no first cause? Because we always want a first cause. You think about it, you go to your therapist, you're digging deep into the past, aren't you? Looking for that needle in a haystack. Aha, now I know why I'm angry. There's the first cause. We do this instinctively. Now, Buddha would say, this view that there is something that is the first cause, which implies that it didn't have a cause, that such a thing can't exist. But we believe there's such a thing because it's a misconception deep in our bones. This really needs thinking about, So conclusion from this, I'm sorry to tell you that matter and universes are beginningless, and so are minds. So we don't need creating, honey. This is Buddha's view. He doesn't talk like that, of course. He's polite. It's a very shocking concept to us. I mean, it sounds like worse than being a communist. So Buddha says the minds are beginningless, and there are trillions. So if there are all trillions of them, there can't be less, because you're also endless. Now, there's different views in Buddhism. In the Hinayana view, they say that when you achieve nirvana, you'll disappear like a puff of smoke. But we have a problem with that, the Dalai Lama said. In the Mahayana view, there's different. Mind is also endless. So there's never more or less sentient beings, and they're all beginningless. I mean, even as I say this, intellectually, I'm comfortable with it, but emotionally, it just sounds weird, because we cling to no cause and effect. We cling to the view of absolute, inherent, intrinsic, no cause. We don't think we cling to that, but these are the mistakes deep in our bones. Buddha says, So the trillions of sentient beings, and they're all in this different form, within this different, they're either the formless realm, form realm, God realm, anti-God realm, human realm, animal, spirit, hell being. There's nobody left over. If you're in samsara, you're in one of those, baby. Something like that. So what Buddha's saying is he's found a method to quit this nonsense, to quit this cycle of rebirth, That's what he's saying. The Christians say it too, but they say heaven is the end result. Buddha says, no, you're still in samsara. He's not being rude, he's just telling what he's found. So the suffering of suffering, then, Buddha's telling us, all these sentient beings we're all creating our own happiness and our own suffering. We are the cause. We are the creator. We are the boss. We don't think this. For sure we don't think this. So here we are, we've got a human birth. So now let's look at why even this is part of the kind of the technology of samsara. If every action we do, which is we describe in junior school in the first scope, if every action we do, the word karma means action. So everything we do with our body, speech and mind is the boss. The real action is called intention, mental action. Everything's driven by intention. We mightn't think so, but it's very, very subtle. The mind is programmed to the point of virtual instinct. But we have to unpack and unravel this mind of ours. So and everything we think and do and say on the basis of that, we leave seeds in our mind. And those seeds eventually, being seeds, will ripen as fruits. So the next level of detail is this. So I'm jumping between the first and second scopes, the first and second noble truths. It doesn't matter. I'll get clear, hopefully. So every millisecond we think and do and say, so seeds in our mind, programs our mind, Buddha would have liked that will then produce naturally and inexorably and inevitably our future experiences. That's what he's saying. So the next level of detail is that every action that's labelled negative, and we must understand what that means, don't just take it as a given. Well, which is an action we do with our body or speech that's driven by a delusion, a neurotic state of mind. I'm going to go to that too. That programs the mind with that type of action, produces a type of rebirth that is suffering, produces a tendency to keep doing it, produces the experience of having it done to you, and produces even an environmental result. There are 4 ways our karma ripens. So all for this for the Buddha is a natural law. No one is running like a botanist didn't make up botany. They observed it. There's a really powerful point about natural law. That's the point I was getting to. So Buddha says there's natural law. You've got Buddha's law in the sense of conventional things, like when the monks and the nuns and the monks started living together. Buddha would say, okay, do this and don't do this. That's Buddha's law. But the fundamentals of the universe, that's natural law for the Buddha. In that sense, there's no equivalent of God's law. This is a very important point to understand. Buddha's not the boss. That's a fact. We do it to ourselves. This is a very powerful concept. And it really does take time to understand this, to feel it, to experience the truth of it, So all these minds, all doing their actions, and some actions that are negative, that are harmful, I'm going to go into all this, will sow seeds in the mind that will ripen as future suffering, the suffering realms of existence. And within even this human birth, we wake up with a tendency to kill, a tendency to lie, a tendency to be angry. We also got good tendencies. They're our saving grace, amazing. And then we have things happen to us, and even the environment can harm us or help us. So these are the way our past actions ripen in the present in these 4 ways. So if I don't want suffering in the future, it's very simple. If I don't want this, we're talking the suffering of suffering here. We're not going any further yet. We're discussing the first kind of suffering. So Buddha says, Robina, do you want to suffer in the future? Because the assumption is your mind will continue. Do you want to be born? Forget about being born in the lower realms. No, thank you. But do you want to be born? Do you want to be lied to, stolen from, raped, terrorized? No, thank you. Well, then don't cause it. Do you want to be happy and have nice things happen to you? Yes. Well, then cause it. But we hear it as blame, you see. No, it's not blame. It's just Buddha's practical explanation of what is the main cause of suffering, and by implication, what is the main cause of happiness. And we all want happiness and don't want suffering. So it's very practical. But we put all this extra rubbish on top of it as blame, guilt, shame, punishment, reward. So it's painful to us. We can't hear it, So the first level of suffering then is when the bad things happen. So look into our lives. Everybody in this room now knows we have certain tendencies that aren't comfortable. We get depressed, we get angry, we get jealous, and then we might act them out by lying or stealing or harming or jumping on the wrong partner or something. Okay, we might be rapists and murderers as well, but probably most of us are fairly nice people. So we have habits. One of the ways karma ripens is your habit. The second way karma ripens in this life is it's called experiences similar to the cause. Well, we know we're very social beings, aren't we? Since the time of conception, we've relied upon for our very existence other sentient beings, mummy and daddy. Then we hop out and we have siblings and dogs and rats and cockroaches and next door neighbours and children and friends and enemies and strangers. We're very social. So we mainly focus on the friends and the enemies. And we all know, everybody in this room has had experiences, some more than others, of people harming us in this life. Equally, but we always forget about this, if we started to list all the good things that have happened to us, we'd probably have hundreds more. But unfortunately, we don't even think about the good things. We tend to take those for granted, and we have panic attacks when the bad things happen. And we need to unpack these assumptions. They're quite deep. And these are the assumptions of attachment and anger. And we'll go into this. This is what samsara means, to unpack and unravel our mind. But the first level of practice, junior school, entry level, grade 1, is back off. As Lama Zopa says, the very first second of practice, what will you do this second? Stop immediately. Stop killing, stealing, lying. In other words, stop harming sentient beings. So you've got to ask, this is what the trouble is, when someone says, stop doing that, we hear mummy being wrathful, and we hear that if we do it, we're naughty and we'll get punished. That's in our mind. That's the view we have. We have the view of punishment and reward very deep in our mind. Buddha says no such thing. He says, when he says don't kill, you've got to ask him why. Jesus says don't kill because God said. That's fine. He's your boss. Buddha says don't kill. He says first how you define a negative action, a very heavy one. The heaviest of negative actions, and we can see this, are those that harm others. It's pretty clear. So that's a statement. They are, don't kill. The first 7 of these 10, he's got 10 bullet points. 10 don'ts. This is the very first level of entry into Buddhism. If you listen to Buddha's advice, this is the first advice he'll give you. He won't say watch your mind and get mindful. That's what the world thinks. But you've got to start controlling the servants of your mind first. If you run around following your attachment, eating 14 pieces of cake and jumping on every boy, and then try to meditate every day, you're not going to succeed. Because you're feeding your delusions. So how can you subdue your delusions, So there's a very logical first step, which is junior school entry level. Buddhist practice is control your servants of your mind. Stop harming sentient beings. Stop following anger and attachment, basically. It's very powerful. So he defines a heavy negative action as one that harms another. But this is the crucial point. At this level of practice, why does he exhort us not to kill, steal, and lie? His reason at this level of practice is because he says, you know what, honey? Everything you think and do and say will leave seeds in your mind that will produce, in this case, suffering experiences, the tendency to keep doing it, to kill, the tendency to get killed, because we're very social beings, we bump into each other. And if this is a natural law, it can't be random. This is very shocking to us. We think everything's random. We think nobody asked who got born, my mother made me, bad luck and good luck. Why do good things happen? I don't know. Why do bad things happen? We don't know. We haven't found the answers yet in the materialist world. Jesus has got his views, Muslims have got their views, Buddha's this view. So the second result in this life of the past act, the first result in this life of the action of, say, killing is you'll wake up with a tendency to kill. Look at the world. Look at the world. This is heartbreaking. The vast majority of humans, most scientific views, most religious views even, say it's appropriate to kill this one or that one, I was taught as a Catholic that God made animals for our benefit. They don't have a soul. It's a very interesting philosophy. Buddha says, no, everybody's suffering. No one wants to be killed, so back off and don't kill anybody. And the reason at this point is for your own sake. I cannot stress this enough. We gloss over this one. You've got to know that you don't want suffering in the future first before you help others stop suffering. If you go to the doctor and you're 20 kilos overweight and you eat the wrong foods, the doctor's giving you advice, not your next door neighbour. I must rush off and give these methods to my next door neighbour. No, you've got to do them first. You've got to know your own suffering and its causes and have the methods of how to solve it. Now you're ready to help others. That's the same here. You've got to know about your own suffering and have the methods of how to stop it. So the reason behind the Buddha exhorting us not to kill, steal, lie, etc. is because it's for your own sake. It's for your own benefit, because they're the things that will cause you future suffering. You've got to know you don't want suffering. You've got to know you don't want suffering. You're sick of suffering. I don't want future cancer. I better stop smoking. I don't want future diabetes. I better stop eating sugar. We don't think that is moralistic. We don't think the doctor's punishing us with cancer. That's bizarre. Buddha's like that. He's giving advice. There's such a thing as punishment and reward in Buddhism. It's a bizarre idea. But we hear it like that. This is very deep in our bones, We've got to really think this through logically. So the first level of practice is stop creating future suffering for yourself. This is to stop the suffering of suffering. So then you can guarantee, if you did the first scope of practice, junior school, stopping harming others, then you commit to being a Buddhist, you take refuge, then you might even make it more strong by living in vows of non-harming, and then you do a bit of purification every day. All this is junior school practice. You can guarantee you'll die with a happy mind. You've got all the seeds all set up and ducks in a row. You'll get a good human birth. You'll have no tendency to kill or lie or steal. People won't kill you or lie or steal from you. You'll be happy, you have nice friends. You'll be a healthy body. Everything will work beautifully because you are the cause of it. It's actually really not complicated, but because we hear it in the framework of punishment and reward and blame and guilt, it's unbearable for us, because we have so many other concepts in the bones of our being, which we have to unpack. Takes time, I tell you. So if you don't want future suffering, Buddha says, stop causing it. If you want happiness, cause it. So the first level is don't this and don't that. There's not much do this and do that yet. It's don't. In other words, pull out the weeds first. They use the analogy of seeds and fruits all the time for karma. Your garden is a great analogy. You hear about a garden, you hear about botany, you hear that you can, you didn't know you could pull out weeds, you didn't know where they came from, you don't know about flowers or herbs, you just think it all just runs themselves together, making a berserk mess. This is our lives, isn't it? And suddenly you hear botany, and it's a revelation to you. You don't start growing flowers immediately, do you? Because it's choked with weeds. You've got to stop growing. First practice, first thing to do, stop sowing more weeds. Then you've got to purify the weeds that haven't grown yet and start pulling out the weeds that are there. Now you've got the space to grow flowers, It's one step at a time. What's the time? 1:30. 1 hour. Okay, I've just sort of begun talking a few different things. I think maybe time for questions, if you have any. And we're going to unpack all this, so we're going to keep going. But any questions for anybody? If not, it doesn't matter. I'm happy to chat away. No? Okay. Well, think of your questions.
If you have a question, just raise your hand and unmute yourself. We're small enough to see that. Don't be shy.
Okay. So 4 noble truths. First kind of suffering. First noble truth, there is suffering. First kind of suffering, the suffering of suffering. So then, now, what we're implying here, we now go to the second noble truth and we check out, I wonder what the causes are. Okay, let's look at what Buddha says here. And we've already said it. So Buddha's view, but I haven't added, there's another piece to add here. Buddha's deal is very simple. He says everything exists according to the law of cause and effect. And we know that. We're geniuses at it. We call it science. That's why we can build 100-story buildings that stay up. We can create amazing gardens. We're absolute geniuses at understanding the law of cause and effect of the physical world. But I think we're a little bit dumb and ignorant when it comes to the mental world, with respect to the neuroscientists. I'm sorry to be rude. I'm talking about the emotional world, That's Buddha's expertise, I would suggest. So his deal is the law of cause and effect in relation to suffering and happiness. And it sort of seems rather simple, but analyze our lives, check ourselves, look at ourselves. Every being you can think of, but think about yourself first. Look at one simple day. Okay, the second noble truth, there are causes of suffering. First we've identified the first kind of suffering. We haven't got to the second yet. So we think, what are the causes of this? Just like the doctor. Well, Robina, you're feeling bad, you go to the doctor, and what is it? She'll identify the causes first, because then she'll say, if you keep doing this, it'll bring that result. You understand? You might even have that result right now. So she'll tell you the causes. So obviously the solution is implied by that, isn't it? Well, you've got, you've got the tendencies to get diabetes, Robina, and the cause of it is this. So the solution is implied by that, isn't it? It's quite a revelation. You can see with some people who go around from doctor to doctor to doctor until the person hits it on the head and says, this is the disease. Then you know the solution. This is quite a profound point. So Buddha's hitting the nail on the head here. Yeah, okay, as far as he's concerned, the law of cause and effect runs everything. It's just the law of the universe. He didn't make that up either. He saw it. He's observed it. At a very gross level to the most subtle. And no one runs it. So what is the cause and effect he's talking about here? It's in relation to happiness and suffering. Look at your life. We all want happy feelings. I was saying that before. Every second of our day, check what you do. Why do you get up out of bed? Okay, because you have to. But why do you go to breakfast? Because you want happiness. Why do you stop eating? Because you want happiness. Why do you sleep? Because you want happiness. Why do you go out to do something? Because you get bored. You always want to have nice feelings. We want pleasant experiences. That's called happiness. We want happiness. And then as soon as an unpleasant feeling comes, we quickly try to get rid of it. We don't sit there and go, oh, how wonderful, this headache, so marvellous. We try everything we can to get rid of the headache. We know that. So we're driven. And Buddha would say that about all sentient beings. When we get to the compassion wing, which is not really the topic of this course, then once you realise for yourself you want happiness and don't want suffering, then you'll see everyone is the same, But the tragedy, Buddha says, is we want happiness, we don't want suffering. But all he says is we're digging ourselves deeper and deeper into more suffering because he's suggesting we don't understand the causes of happiness. This is a tragedy, he says. So as far as he's concerned, I've implied it already. He's saying there are two main causes of suffering. And of course the implication is there are two main causes of happiness, which is important to remember. Because sometimes we get so overwrought by the suffering, we get a bit distressed, There are two main causes. The first is called karma, which means action, which we've implied already. And the second is the delusion, the mind. And in the mind, Buddha, this is where in this level of practice, in the middle scope, we learn more deeply about the way the mind works. In the first level of practice, we try to control the servants of the mind by not killing, stealing, raping, lying, bad-mouthing, etc. Pretty clear. At least you stop the major results. So now we've got to get to the deeper level. What is it that drives the behavior? Well, that's the mind, isn't it? That's our mind. And this is Buddha's expertise. This is the Buddha's view of the mind. I mean, of course I'm prejudiced. I like Buddha, but it seems to me it's a pretty amazing model of the mind. It's incredibly extensive and deep, and it's been around for thousands of years, and it's extraordinary. So I mean, it's a very fascinating model of the mind. But the point is, because the words he uses for the contents of our mind, like love and compassion and anger and jealousy, we're very familiar with those. But we have different views of what they are, but crucially, we have different views of what causes them. This is where he's fundamentally different. And the only way we're going to understand this is by listening and reading and studying and thinking about it very, very carefully. So as far as he's concerned, there are two main causes we're talking about the suffering, the grossest kind. So you got your boyfriend, and he's mean to you. And I'm unhappy, I'm crying. Normal life. And Margot says, what's wrong, Robina? Why are you suffering? Of course, I will say, because my boyfriend was mean to you. And she won't argue with me. So then equally she'll see me happy. Robina, why are you so happy, darling? What caused it? Oh, my boyfriend's so kind to me. Now, if we think about this, is Buddha saying our biggest mistake, and this is reinforced with respect by our materialist philosophical view of the prevalent view of the universe, that the outside world is the main cause of our suffering, and indeed of our happiness. In other words, we blame our boyfriend for the suffering, but we also blame our boyfriend for the happiness. And he says we've got it wrong. He's not saying that the boyfriend's behavior doesn't play a role. It is evident that it does. But he's saying you're missing the main point. And that's called your mind, Robina. And so that's we have to learn to know the mind. Which part of my mind is the cause of my suffering? This is such a technical point, but it's incredibly difficult for it to hear this. It's not complicated what he's saying, actually. It's very fascinating. So there's two things going on. One is karma. So the karmic explanation of why is my boyfriend being mean to me is we've got a very strong karmic connection. We've got some strong history together. If karma is a natural law, then there can be nothing that happens that is random. But we believe most of what goes on in life is random. We call it good luck and bad luck. As we say, the scientists haven't found the causes yet. So we just think it's good luck and bad luck. Buddha says nonsense. The law, if you're a Christian, God runs it. That's more coherent to me than the materialist view, quite frankly. At least someone's got a plan. At least somebody knows what's going on. And then you have faith in God. I would never criticize that view. I'm sorry. So the Buddha's views are different from that. Is that every millisecond what I think and do and say produces a tendency to do that thing. And the next one is called experiences similar to the cause, which is to have that done to me. We are very intensely social beings. We live in relation to others. We create karma in relation to others. We make we make positive relationships and we make negative ones. Well, we're going to keep bumping into each other, baby. It's not going to just disappear into smoke. That's how we continue to keep samsara alive. So we're going to keep meeting our enemies and meeting our friends and meeting our strangers. This is what we do. So that boyfriend is not just some random person in my life. We've got intense karmic history. We bump into each other. Oh, there's Fred. You fall in love instantly. You believe he's the best thing on the planet, better than sliced bread. He looks divine to you. That's driven by your attachment, and we're going to go into all these things. This hunger in me that feels I'm not a whole person, and then believes now I found happiness. So then you dump all these expectations onto Fred, and then Fred dares to do something, not listen to you perfectly or even be mean to you. It's true. Then attachment doesn't get what it wants, and then aversion arises, and now I'm suffering. So the logic we have is I'm this innocent victim. I didn't ask to get born. Whatever happens to me is just random. It's not my fault. I'm a nice person. I don't deserve bad things. And then, of course, we never ask the question, why do good things happen? I've never met a person yet in all my years who's ever asked the question, why do good things happen? We only ever ask, why do the bad things happen? And we can really go into this in depth, if we had the time. It's very powerful. So then we blame the outside, basically. Why are you vomiting? Because the cake was horrible. Why are you feeling happy? Because the cake was nice. Everything's like this. So we are addicted to getting the 5 sense objects to make us to be pleasing, to be stroked by the 5 sense objects. And that's what we call happiness. So this is where we have to go into more detail to really technically understand what Buddha means by happiness and suffering. There's a more subtle level now. But first of all, again, in the second noble truth, the second facts for the noble ones, the 2 main causes of my suffering, and by implication my happiness, are past action that I did that sowed a seed in my mind, that action that was driven by a delusion, and it's in relation to this person. Karma's personal, please. This is very shocking to us. Karma's personal. Well, you drop a seed, that's where the fruit will come. If you punch a person, Fred, in the nose 42 lives ago, that fruit of being punched can't come from somewhere else. You drop a seed in that ground, an oak tree will come 42 lives later, 42 years later. So karma has to be personal. It's logical. It's very surprising to us. So the first cause of my suffering is the fact that I harmed Fred in the past, and now the karma's ripening is him harming me. And the second cause of my suffering, which is the first one, which is what underpins the action in the past, a delusion, the anger that impelled me to do that action. So now it's manifesting, and now in my present mind, the delusion arises in my mind of how dare he do this to me, it's not fair, so even more suffering, and then I respond accordingly. And so we keep the ball of suffering going, I mean, just this view alone, this is like middle, junior, high school, is so intense, so hard for most of it. Even most Buddhists, we can't handle karma, So if we want to know Buddhism, we need to unpack and unravel and analyse and unpack all the nonsense and the misconceptions we've got packed around it. Because it's not punishment and reward. And this is what's so fascinating. We know this when you go to your doctor. You didn't realise. When I was smoking cigarettes when I was an old hippie, actually I started when I was 15, actually 13. When I was in love with Jimmy Dean in the 1950s, James Dean, remember? James Dean. I was absolutely obsessed with James Dean. I was 12 or 13. And I cut my hair to look like Jimmy Dean. I wanted to be his girlfriend. I was called Judy. In Rebel Without a Cause, his girlfriend was called Judy. So I fantasized that I was Judy. But not only that, I wanted to be Jimmy Dean as well. It was like completely insane. So I cut my hair to look like Jimmy Dean, and I'd steal my mother's Garrick cigarettes. That was the English cigarette, or what was the 1950s. And I would look in the mirror and try to smoke a cigarette looking like Jimmy Dean. It was total identification. So I started when I was 13. Then when I was 15, I really started. And then I was, from there on. I stopped when I was 29 or something, 28. Now, I didn't think about smoking. I didn't know it caused cancer. I never heard of cancer, I vaguely heard about it. When you're young, who could care, So I didn't know. So in other words, I go to the doctor, my lungs are terrible. Well, sweetheart, the cause of this is you're going to get cancer. The cause of this is what? Smoking. Oh, really? I didn't know that. So I'm not going to say to her, what's going to result in? She says cancer, Robina, and she shows me the videos of the cancerous lungs. I'm not going to have a panic attack and say, how dare you blame me? I'm going to sue you for blaming me for suffering. No, I'm so delighted that she's told me the cause, and I'm happy to do it exactly what she says, which is give up cigarettes and try to heal the problem. But as soon as it comes to emotional things, you've got to think this is very fascinating. As soon as it comes to emotional things, we have a mental breakdown because we have this very different view. It's called punishment and reward. It's very fascinating. You ought to be fascinated by it. When you're playing piano and you've got a music teacher, he says, don't play that note. You're so happy to hear that you played the wrong note. Now I'll play the right note because I want to be a good musician. You don't sue her for abuse because she dares to tell you played a wrong note and she's going to punish you with not being a good musician. It's kind of demented, but that's how we hear it. We can't help it. Our poor deluded minds hear it like this. It's very painful. So we've got to think about this so carefully and so logically and unpack to get it to its simple essence, And the interesting point about this, of course, karma, I found this in my experience, is, because I know when I first heard these teachings, that was the word that really blew my mind. I started to try and think what it meant. That was the piece that was missing in my life. It was very powerful for me. And what I liked about it, even from the beginning, is that it empowered me. I'm the boss. I much prefer that view. I created myself. I much prefer that view. I can be accountable. Logically, if my parents created me, which is what we think, listen to this. If my parents created me, then my mother, who was a musician, let's say, she taught me music. We would say Robina got her music from her mother. My mother taught me, and my music came from my mother. Well, the Buddha would say, no, it didn't. My music, I got born being good at music because I'd practiced it before. And my mother was good at music because she practiced it before. And then we conveniently came together and she taught me taught me how to nourish my potential for music. But there's an ownership there. It's my music, This is very powerful. So therefore it's also my anger. It's also my sadness. It's also my depression. Because then there's less hopelessness. Because if you know you caused it, you can change it. This is the logic, So if you really take the view of karma, if we can, it actually doesn't bring more guilt and shame. That's a misconception. It's not punishment. It's not reward, because there are no such thing as a punisher or a rewarder in Buddhism. It's a natural law. So it's a revelation. It should empower us and make us less neurotic, less guilty, less blaming, less victim, more courageous, more confident. This is literally, I can tell you that much. I mightn't have many realizations, I haven't got many. That I can tell you with certainty. It's very powerful. So come on, I want some questions before you continue. I'd love some questions before we continue. Please ask questions, I beg you. Please ask me some questions. Let's unpack what we discussed already so far, okay?
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely. Where are you? Who are you?
I'm here, Beverly.
Oh, look at Beverly. Good, sweetheart. Talk to me.
Hello.
Good.
I probably asked you this last year, Robina, and the time before.
Go on, don't worry.
Because it's the season, okay? So I try to be nice to little bugs and animals and critters, and things. And my cat comes in covered in ticks.
Right.
Yeah. And I have a rare allergy. Ticks would actually kill me, or the medicine to kill the ticks would kill me.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I have to take them off. Now, it's what I do with them. So I don't just kill them.
No.
But I don't treat them. I put them in the bin.
But do you say mantras and blow on the little creature and give it a blessing?
I haven't done. I do prayers for them, and I ask for
but even better, more direct. You see, everything. Sometimes you see the way. This is a really good point, Beverly, because we can see the way this world is. We can't escape harming each other in one form or another. Especially even if we're wholly vegetarians and vegans, we sort of conveniently forget that billions of creatures are dying every day, even for the growing of the vegetables. So we really can't, we shouldn't get so arrogant think because you don't eat meat, you're not a holy person. So no matter what we do, Beverly, our body, darling, is a walking zoo. By breathing, you harm beings. Beings are tiny and we can't help. So when you have this bigger picture, it's much more humble and you realize, well, all I can do is do my best. See, the thing is, it's not trying to get off the hook, it's not my fault, I can't help it. We've got to really know that everything we think and do and say does sow seeds in our mind. It's sort of like going to the doctor. I'm not saying you're saying this, but you go to the doctor, I can't help it eating sugar. Can you please get me off the hook and not give me diabetes? It doesn't work like that. Sugar will bring diabetes. So then if you can't avoid sugar, because there's in every food on the planet, then you have to mitigate it by doing other things and at least be conscious of it. The key one is we've got to be so conscious that our very existence is harming others. So if you feel you've got no choice but to proactively take the lice, what are they called? The ticks, right?
Ticks.
So if you take the ticks off your animal, so you got to make it a pure motivation. You're making the motivation just for your own benefit. That's selfish. You've got to make it for a bigger motivation. You've got to make a big motivation. You've got to really think, I don't want to harm these beings. They're living beings like you and me. I don't want to harm them. You've got to have that sincere, compassionate wish. So you say mantra, you blow on it, and you make aspiration that breath, which is blessed by the mantra, will bless that consciousness. And you do everything in your power to not harm it. You do everything in your power to not harm it. But it's got to be the purest motivation possible. Not just, I can't help it, because if I eat it, it'll kill me. Therefore, it's okay to kill them. Don't be that way. We've got to be very conscious and accountable. If you're a bodhisattva, Beverly, they would happily let the ticks kill them. But we're not at that level yet. But at least we can aspire, darling. We've got to be conscious. You get my point? Because karma is a natural law, and whatever's in your mind will program your mind with that. So obviously you don't want to program your mind with kind of carelessness. You don't want to program your mind with lots of killing. You don't want to program your mind with self-centeredness. So you make your mind as pure as you can, given the conditions of our lives, sweetheart.
I'm very conscious. Everyone I take off, I'm also aware they're all female as well, so I feel sort of...
What does that mean? What do you mean by that? So then?
No, just because I'm a female, I feel I sort of say, I'm so sorry. I know you're just trying to kind of feed yourself. But I hadn't blown on them and said mantras. I will do it more in a more focused way.
Lama Zopa even said that a bone that's 1,000 years old, one, because of the karmic connection between the consciousness that whose body that was once, there's a strong connection, and two, because of the power of mantra, the blessing your breath and blowing on that bone, the consciousness wherever it is now will get the benefit.
Yeah, thank you.
So we do what we can to mitigate our actions as much as we can. Be conscious as we can and try and cultivate wisdom and not want future suffering for yourself, and then by cultivating compassion. That's all we can do, Beverly.
Yeah, thank you.
And if one day you can give your life for the tick, then bodhisattva. Well done, Beverly. But we do what we can, Do you understand? Lama Zopa, he's famous one time in Kopan. He would for example, one of my friend Nick Rebush would say that Nick's job was to bring Lama Zopa a cup of tea at 3 a.m. while he was in it, because he's just meditating all day and night. So then he'd bring in a cup of tea, and in the rainy season when you got mosquitoes everywhere, Lama Zopa is in meditation, but his shirt is over his head and his body is naked, feeding it to the mosquitoes. Now, who's got that level of compassion, baby? It sounds too weird to talk about, doesn't it?
Oh.
That's right. So slowly, darling, we can aspire. Do you understand? Good. Thank you. Thanks, Beverly. Who else, darlings? What else is there to say? Any questions?
Yeah, Issy, I think.
Iffy? Who? Where? Fee?
Issy or Hamish?
Yes, I have a
Hello,
question
Hamish. Yes.
on forgiveness.
What, sweetheart?
To forgive somebody for what an action they did on you.
I don't understand. I'm so sorry, Hamish. My hearing isn't good. Please forgive me. I can't hear your question. I'm so sorry. It's my mistake.
He has a question on forgiveness.
Oh, yes. What is the question?
The question is, why can't I fully forgive somebody?
Why can't we what, darling?
Fully go all the way to I can't say the few words to the person.
Please forgive me, but Issy, can you explain? Please forgive me, Hamish. It's my mistake. I can't hear. So can Issy tell me what you said? Please forgive me, Hamish.
He said, can you tell him why he can't fully forgive someone?
Oh.
Why can't he go up to them and say words to them?
Oh, Hamish, what a powerful question that is. Well, sweetheart, Hamish, it doesn't sound very... It's because I think the answer is quite a deep one, Hamish. As I've been talking, the Buddhist view is that we've got this very ingrained, deeply instinctive habit to identify this very strong sense of concrete me. Then on the basis of that mistake, we have this emotional hunger called attachment that only wants the nice things for me. So as soon as someone harms us, and people do harm us, then anger arises, hurt arises, resentment arises, and then because we don't have a feeling for the view of karma, we think we didn't ask to get born, we didn't do anything to that person, and they come along and they're mean to you. So of course the instinctive ego is shocked. How dare that happen to me? So one of the powerful ways to have forgiveness is, I mean, if this is appropriate for our minds, Hamish, we've got to all know what we can practice. One of the powerful methods is to know that we've had a relationship with this person in the past, we've been good to them, but we've also been unkind to them, and this is the karma coming back. So this is why I always tell the story. This is very powerful. You know, the Tibetans have been having Buddhism for like 1,200 years in their country. And this years ago, when I was working in California running the prison project, Liberation Prison Project, working with lots of people in prison. And then Richard Gere one year in New York, as you know, he's a Buddhist, this actor, he decided to invite His Holiness the Dalai Lama to New York. And he decided to do some work with prisoners. So he invited 20 former prisoners, all of whom had done some kind of meditation in prison. And he invited people like me who were working with people in prison. I was visiting many prisons at that time. So he invited all these prisoners. It was a very moving day. They all talked about their suffering in prison. They met the Dalai Lama. It was a wonderful day. Now, what also Richard Gere did was he invited 2 young Tibetan nuns. So as we know, the Tibetans have had the view of karma for 1,200 years. So in the same way that in our lives, the view of I didn't ask to get born, it's not my fault, it's my mother's fault, my father's fault, life is just random, suffering just happens, I don't know why. We've got that philosophy. But for these young nuns, it's automatic in their minds that they have the view of karma. So the point was they were talking about their suffering of being imprisoned, sexually abused, and tortured in prison by the Chinese Communist guards. So they had probably a couple of years of incredible suffering, right? So these young women were talking about their suffering, but they weren't angry, Hamish, because they have the view of karma that's very deep in their bones. They've really practiced that all their lives, and they weren't angry or resentful or bitter because they really worked on their minds. It's very intense. And at the end of their talk, there was tears, right? They had tears in their eyes. And one of them said, and of course, we had compassion for our torturers because we know we harmed them in the past. But also, crucially, because they said, because we know, because of the harm they did to us, they will suffer in the future. So when we can have compassion for the harm that for the people who harm us, then it's easy to forgive them. But we have to have this view of karma. It doesn't come otherwise, Hamish. So it's an intense point. What do you think? What do you think?
We want to see if we do it.
It takes time, Hamish, but it's a very powerful philosophical view. And when we think it through logically and we start to practice it, it really alleviates the pain and it can really help us realize that person's suffering so much. Then we can understand and then it's easy to forgive. But we can't force it, Hamish, because sometimes the harm that people do us is very intense. We can't force ourselves. We have to go slowly, you know.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hamish. Such a good point. What else, people?
I do have a question.
Yes.
And in Scotland, we just had a change of the organ donation law.
Yes.
That it's no longer opt-in, but opt-out.
I know that's.
And
I know this is.
For me,
yeah. Go on.
For me, it's very difficult to make up my mind. What should I do with it?
That's a very
because
good
on
point.
one hand, you're not really dead when they take the organs
That's right.
out. At least from some scientist's point of view.
Exactly.
On the other hand, I do not know what would be best to do if you're on the other end about receiving organs
so important.
that have been donated from another person.
Yes.
So I do not know where I should go with this.
I understand.
That's my question.
I wish I could see your face. I can't see which face is talking. Where are you? I can't see you.
Me, yeah.
Oh, there you are. Oh, Mark, I'm sorry. So listen, darling, I hope you don't die by tomorrow, but if you don't die by tomorrow, I think we should discuss this because I'd need to spend like 10 or 15 minutes really doing it carefully. It's a very interesting and very powerful topic. Can you wait till tomorrow? It's a brilliant question. It's a perfect question. But I will tell you that you might know or might not know, but one of the books that's come out recently of Lama Zopa's called How to Face Death Without Fear is exactly every bit of this information in it. It's an entire handbook. And again, because I edited it, I'm very familiar with it, so I can again discuss it. It's such an important question. It's a powerful question. And, so we'll discuss it tomorrow, if that's okay with you, Mark.
Excellent. Perfect.
Good. Fantastic. I'll remember. So I think we can finish, don't you think, Margot? 5 minutes early? Any more questions? I'm not in a hurry. Any more questions? If not, that's really okay. Okay, sweethearts. So we'll do our little dedication. So here we've been, an hour and a half, gone like a dream, isn't it? Chatting away, all thinking and listening, and I'm listening, I promise. So then we've sowed all these seeds. Everything goes in. Geshe Tashi in London says, we're shooting a movie all day. This is how the mind works. Nothing goes astray. Everything gets stored in our memory. So that point. And then second, because we've tried to work it out and trying to have inspiration to practice, we've been trying to think about all the meaning of these things. These seeds we've planted. How amazing. We've done an hour and a half of delicious gardening. So be so delighted. And we do the dedication. Meaning, all these seeds we've planted, may we continue to nourish them with our virtue, with our goodness from this second forward, so that we will become a Buddha. So we can really be of benefit to sentient beings. And the second little prayer made this amazing aspiration called bodhicitta, grow and grow in the hearts of all. And I'll just sing those thoughts in Tibetan. Kewadinyu dudag lama sangye drub gyune Drowa chikyang malupar Dei sala gupashok Jang chob sem chog rinpoche ma kie panam ke gyutig kie panyam pa me payang gong ne gong du pelvashok. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Venerable Robina. It was just such a privilege to hear you and to hear it again and again.
That's it, darling. I know. That is the one, isn't it? Every time I say it, it's the same for me. So thank you for the opportunity, everybody. Thank you, sweethearts.
Yes.
Assuming we don't all die by tonight, but if we don't, we'll see each other tomorrow. Keep moving, okay? Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Hamish. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. Thank you, Mark. So much love to both of you.